The morning sun was just starting to peek over the horizon when 17-year-old Rosa heard the wagon wheels creaking. She opened her eyes slowly, expecting to see her late husband's family preparing breakfast like they had done every morning for the past 2 weeks. Instead, she saw something that made her heart stop. They were leaving. Without her. Rosa sat up quickly, holding her 3-month-old baby girl, Luna, closer to her chest. The wagon was already 50 yards away, moving steadily across the empty Texas plains. She could see the backs of the people who had promised to take care of her after her husband died from the terrible fever that had swept through their small settlement. "Wait," she called out, her voice cracking in the dry morning air. "Please wait for me." But the wagon kept moving. Nobody looked back. Rosa struggled to her feet, still weak from childbirth and the difficult journey they had been on for weeks. She had trusted these people. They were family after all. When her husband Thomas passed away, his older brother had promised to take her to the nearest town where she could start over with her baby. Now she understood the truth. They had never planned to help her. The night before, she had heard whispers around the campfire. Angry voices talking about how her baby's crying was too loud, how it might attract dangerous people in the area. They complained about sharing their food with another mouth to feed, and worried that taking care of a young mother and baby would slow them down. Rosa had pretended to be asleep, hoping she had misunderstood their words. But now, as she watched the wagon disappear over a small hill, she knew exactly what they meant. She looked around at the endless landscape surrounding her. Rolling hills covered in dry grass stretched in every direction. There were no trees, no buildings, no signs of other people anywhere. The only things left behind were a small cloth bundle with some bread and dried meat, and a water container that was already half empty. Luna started to cry, her tiny voice seeming impossibly loud. In the vast silence, Rosa bounced her gently, trying to calm her down while fighting back her own tears. "It's okay, little one," she whispered, though her voice was shaking. "Mama will figure this out." But deep down, Rosa was terrified. She had grown up in a small, farming community back east and had never spent a single night alone in the wilderness. She knew nothing about surviving outdoors, finding food, or protecting herself from wild animals. And she certainly didn't know how to do any of these things while caring for a tiny baby. The sun climbed higher in the sky and the temperature started to rise. Rosa picked up the small bundle of supplies and began walking in the direction the wagon had gone. Maybe if she followed their tracks, she could catch up to them. Maybe they would change their minds and take her back. But after walking for hours under the blazing sun, Rosa realized how foolish this hope was. The wagon tracks were getting harder to see in the rocky ground, and she was getting weaker with every step. Luna was crying more often now, hungry and uncomfortable in the heat. By afternoon, Rosa's water was almost gone. She had been giving most of it to Luna, knowing the baby needed it more than she did. Her lips were cracked and dry, and her legs felt like they might give out at any moment. She found a small patch of shade behind some rocks and sat down to rest. Luna had finally fallen asleep, exhausted from crying. Rosa looked down at her daughter's peaceful face and felt a mix of love and desperation that was almost overwhelming. "I don't know what to do," she whispered to the sleeping baby. "I don't know how to keep you safe out here." The landscape around them was beautiful in its own way, with endless blue sky and golden grass swaying in the wind. But it was also deadly for someone without experience or supplies. Rosa had heard stories about people getting lost in these plains and never being found again. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Rosa forced herself to keep walking. She couldn't give up, not when Luna was depending on her. Maybe there was a settlement nearby that she just couldn't see yet. Maybe someone would come along and help them. But as darkness fell and the temperature dropped dramatically, Rosa had to face the reality of their situation. She found a small depression in the ground that offered some protection from the wind and made a bed using her shawl. She held Luna close to her body, trying to keep them both warm. The night sounds of the wilderness surrounded them, owls hooting. In the distance, the rustle of small animals in the grass and strange calls that Rosa couldn't identify. Every sound made her jump, imagining dangerous creatures lurking in the darkness. Luna woke up several times during the night, hungry and cold. Rosa tried to nurse her, but she was so dehydrated and stressed that she wasn't producing enough milk. The baby's cries echoed across the empty plains, and Rosa worried that they might attract unwanted attention. When morning came, Rosa felt worse than she had ever felt in her life. Her head was pounding from dehydration, her body ached from sleeping on the hard ground, and she felt dizzy every time she tried to stand up. Luna seemed weaker too, her cries becoming softer and less frequent. Rosa knew they wouldn't survive another day like this. She picked up her baby and started walking again. Though she had no idea which direction to go, the landscape looked the same in every direction, and there were no landmarks to guide her. All she could do was put one foot in front of the other and hope for a miracle. The second day was even worse than the first. The sun seemed hotter. The distances seemed longer, and Rosa's strength was fading fast. She stumbled frequently, sometimes falling to her knees in the dirt. Each time she forced herself to get back up, driven by her determination to protect her child. By the third morning, Rosa could barely walk. She had finished the last of her water the night before, and Luna had stopped crying altogether. The baby's silence was more frightening than her tears had been. Rosa found herself beside a dried-up creek bed, where she collapsed in exhaustion. She couldn't go any further. This was where their journey would end, she realized. She held Luna close and closed her eyes, preparing for the worst. That's when she heard the sound that would change everything. Hoofbeats. Coming closer. Rosa's eyes flew open when she heard the horses approaching. Her heart started beating so fast she thought it might burst from her chest. She tried to sit up, but her weak body barely responded. Luna lay still in her arms, breathing so softly that Rosa had to put her ear close to the baby's mouth to make sure she was still alive. The hoofbeats got louder and closer. Rosa squinted against the bright morning sun and saw shapes moving toward her across the plains. Her first thought was relief. Maybe it was someone who could help them, but as the riders came closer, that relief quickly turned to fear. These weren't settlers or soldiers. These were Comanche warriors. Rosa had heard stories about the Comanche people all her life. Most of those stories were frightening tales told by settlers who spoke of fierce fighters and dangerous raids. She had been taught to fear them, to hide from them, to run if she ever saw them coming. But now she couldn't run. She could barely move. 5 riders approached on painted horses, their long black hair flowing in the wind. They wore leather clothing decorated with beads and feathers, and carried weapons that gleamed in the sunlight. Rosa held her breath and pulled Luna closer, not knowing what would happen next. The lead rider was different from the others. He was older, maybe in his 30s, with kind eyes that seemed to see everything at once. His horse was a beautiful spotted mare that moved like she was dancing. When he saw Rosa and the baby, he raised his hand to signal the other riders to stop. The man dismounted slowly, keeping his movements calm and non-threatening. He approached Rosa carefully, the way someone might approach a wounded animal. When he was close enough, he knelt down and looked at her with concern in his dark eyes. Rosa wanted to speak, to ask for help, but her throat was so dry that only a whisper came out. The man seemed to understand anyway. He reached for a container, made from buffalo horn that hung from his belt, and offered it to her. Water. Clean, cool water. Rosa's hands shook as she took the container and drank deeply. The water tasted better than anything she had ever experienced. When she had drunk enough to speak, she looked at the man with gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. The man nodded and gestured toward Luna. Rosa understood that he wanted to see if the baby was okay. She pulled back the blanket that covered her daughter's face, revealing the tiny, pale features of her child. Luna's lips were dry and cracked, and her skin felt hot to the touch. The man frowned with concern and spoke to his companions in their own language. Rosa couldn't understand the words, but she could hear the urgency in his voice. One of the other warriors argued back, his tone angry and harsh. Rosa didn't need to speak their language to understand what was happening. They were debating what to do with her and Luna. Some wanted to help, others wanted to leave them there. The older man, the leader, listened to all the arguments. Then he stood up and spoke in a firm, clear voice that ended the discussion. Whatever. He had decided the others would follow his choice. He turned back to Rosa and made gestures that she gradually understood. He was telling her that they would take her and Luna with them. They were going to help. Rosa felt tears of relief streaming down her face. She tried to stand up to show her gratitude, but her legs gave out immediately. The leader caught her before she fell and helped her sit back down. He spoke to one of the younger warriors who brought over a horse and began preparing it for extra passengers. Getting Rosa and Luna onto the horse was difficult. Rosa was so weak that she could barely hold on to Luna, let alone stay upright on horseback. The leader solved this problem by mounting behind her, holding both mother and baby securely as they rode. As they began moving across the plains, Rosa felt safer than she had in days. The steady rhythm of the horse's movement and the strong arms holding her secure allowed her to relax for the first time since being abandoned. Luna seemed to sense the change too, and she slept peacefully for the first time in days. They rode, for hours across landscapes that Rosa had never seen before. Rolling hills gave way to rocky canyons, and streams appeared where Rosa had seen only dry land. The warriors knew this country like she knew her own backyard back home. They followed paths that were invisible to her eyes, and found water sources that seemed to appear from nowhere. As they traveled, Rosa began to observe her rescuers more carefully. The leader who had saved them was clearly respected by the others. When he spoke, they listened. When he made decisions, they followed without question. But Rosa could see that his choice to help her had not been popular with everyone in the group. The youngest warrior, who looked to be about her own age, kept glancing back at her with suspicious eyes. An older warrior with scars on his face seemed angry about the whole situation. Only one other member of the group, a middle-aged man with gentle eyes, seemed supportive of their leader's decision. Rosa wondered what would happen when they reached wherever they were going. Would these people really help her and Luna, or were they just postponing the inevitable? She had heard stories about settlers being taken captive, though she had never known if those stories were true. But as the hours passed and the warriors continued to treat her with kindness and respect, Rosa began to feel something she hadn't expected. Hope. The leader checked on her and Luna regularly during their journey. He made sure they had enough water and that they were comfortable. When Luna woke up and started crying from hunger, he called for a halt so that Rosa could try to nurse her baby. He even shared some of his own food, dried meat and something, that tasted like honey, to help Rosa regain her strength. As the sun began to set, Rosa could see smoke rising in the distance. They were approaching a large encampment with many hide-covered shelters arranged in organized clusters. Horses grazed in nearby fields, and Rosa could see people moving around between the shelters, going about their daily activities. This was a Comanche village, a real living community where families made their homes and raised their children. It looked nothing like the savage war camps that Rosa had imagined from the stories she'd heard. As they rode into the village, people came out to see what was happening. Rosa saw women, children, and elderly people mixed in with the warriors. They looked curious about the newcomers, and Rosa heard many conversations happening in the Comanche language. Some people looked friendly and welcoming. Others seemed concerned or even angry about the presence of a white woman and baby in their village. Rosa could feel the tension in the air and wondered again what her fate would be. The leader helped Rosa down from the horse and supported her as they walked toward the center of the village. Luna had woken up and was looking around with wide eyes at all the new sights and sounds. An elderly woman with silver hair and a face full of wisdom approached them. She looked at Rosa and Luna with eyes that seemed to see right into their souls. Then she began speaking to the leader in a voice that commanded respect from everyone around. Rosa didn't understand the words, but she could tell this was an important conversation. The elderly woman was asking questions, and the leader was explaining what had happened and why he had brought them here. Other people gathered around to listen. Rosa saw faces that showed curiosity, concern, suspicion, and kindness all mixed together. She realized that her presence here was causing quite a stir in this community. Finally, the elderly woman stepped forward and looked directly at Rosa. She spoke slowly in broken English, choosing her words carefully. You and baby. Stay tonight, she said. Tomorrow? We decide. Rosa nodded gratefully, understanding that she had been given at least one more day of safety. Whatever happened next would depend on decisions made by people she didn't know, in a language she didn't speak, according to customs she didn't understand. But for tonight, she and Luna were alive, they were safe, and they were warm. After 3 days of thinking they were going to die alone in the wilderness, that felt like a miracle. Rosa woke up the next morning in a place that felt like a different world. She was lying on soft buffalo hides inside a warm shelter, with Luna sleeping peacefully beside her. For a moment, she forgot where she was and how she had gotten there. Then the memories came flooding back. The abandonment, the desperate days in the wilderness, and the unexpected rescue by the Comanche warriors. Outside the shelter, she could hear the sounds of daily life in the village. Children laughing and playing, women talking as they worked, and men discussing important matters. The sounds were comforting in a way that surprised her. An older woman entered the shelter carrying a bowl of warm food. This was the same silver-haired woman who had spoken to her the night before. Her name, Rosa learned through gestures and simple words, was Ayana. She had been chosen to decide what would happen to Rosa and Luna. Ayana sat down beside Rosa and watched as she ate the warm soup gratefully. The food tasted unlike anything Rosa had ever eaten before, but it was delicious and filling. As she ate, Ayana spoke to her in a mixture of English words and Comanche phrases, trying to learn Rosa's story. Rosa did her best to explain what had happened to her. She told Ayana about her husband's death, about being abandoned by his family, and about the 3 terrible days alone in the wilderness. Ayana listened carefully, nodding with understanding even when the language barrier made communication difficult. When Rosa finished her story, Ayana was quiet for a long time. Then she spoke in careful English. Your people leave you to die, she said, shaking her head sadly. This is not right way. Rosa felt tears coming to her eyes as someone finally acknowledged the terrible thing that had been done to her. For days she had wondered if somehow she deserved what happened. Maybe she really was too much trouble. Maybe her baby's crying really was too loud. Maybe she should have tried harder to be useful to her late husband's family. But Ayana's words made it clear that the abandonment was wrong, not Rosa's fault. You stay with us, Ayana continued. You learn our ways. You become part of our family. Rosa was amazed. These people were offering her a home when her own people had left her to die. But she also knew it wouldn't be simple. She would have to prove herself worthy of their kindness. Over the following days, Rosa began to learn what that meant. Ayana assigned different women in the village to teach her various skills she would need to survive and contribute to the community. First, she had to learn the language. The younger children in the village became her best teachers, giggling as they pointed to different objects and said the Comanche words for them. Rosa repeated the words over and over, slowly building a vocabulary that would allow her to communicate with her new family. Learning to speak was just the beginning. Rosa also had to learn how to prepare food in the Comanche way, how to work with animal hides to make clothing and shelter materials, and how to gather plants that could be used for medicine or food. None of it was easy. Rosa's hands, which had been soft from her previous life, became rough and calloused from the hard work. Her back ached from bending over to gather roots and berries. Her fingers were constantly pricked by thorns and cut by sharp tools. But with each passing day, Rosa grew stronger and more confident. She discovered that she had talents she never knew existed. She was particularly good at working with plant medicines, having a natural ability to remember which plants were used for different purposes. Luna thrived in the village environment. The baby was constantly surrounded by women who loved children and were happy to help care for her. Rosa watched in amazement as her daughter was passed from woman to woman, each one singing to her in Comanche or playing games that made her laugh. It was during Luna's second month in the village that the naming ceremony took place. Ayana explained that both Rosa and Luna needed proper Comanche names if they were going to truly belong to the community. The ceremony happened on a clear evening when the whole village gathered around a large fire. Rosa and Luna were brought to the center of the circle, where Ayana and the other elders had been discussing their new names for hours. Ayana stood up and spoke to the assembled crowd in Comanche. Though Rosa couldn't understand all the words, she could tell that Ayana was telling the story of how they had been found and rescued. She was explaining why the village had decided to accept them as family members. Then Ayana turned to Rosa and spoke in English so she would understand. "You are mother who would die for child," she said. "You protect with love stronger than fear. Your name is Nayeli. It means I love you." Rosa felt overwhelmed with emotion. In her old life, she had been just another woman in a small farming community. Here, she was being recognized for the thing that mattered most to her love for her daughter. Then Ayana picked up Luna, who was now 4 months old and much healthier than she had been when they arrived. "This little one brings light to dark places," Ayana announced. "She is hope for tomorrow. Her name is Sitlali. It means star." The village erupted in celebration. People cheered and sang, and Rosa, now Nayeli, felt truly welcomed for the first time since her husband's death. But not everyone in the village was happy about the naming ceremony. The next morning, Nayeli overheard some of the younger warriors arguing near the horse corral. Though her Comanche was still limited, she understood enough to know they were talking about her. They were saying that it was dangerous to trust white people. They spoke about other villages that had been attacked by settlers and families that had been killed by people who looked just like Nayeli. Some felt that keeping her in the village would bring bad luck or attract unwanted attention from the army. Nayeli understood their concerns. She had grown up hearing equally frightening stories about Comanche raids on settler communities. Both sides had reasons to fear and distrust each other, but she also saw something in this village that gave her hope. Here, people made decisions based on individual actions, not on what group someone belonged to. Ayana and the other elders had looked at Nayeli as a person, a mother trying to protect her child, rather than just as a white settler. The warrior who had rescued her, whose name she learned was Dakota, often checked on her progress as she learned the village ways. He was patient with her mistakes and encouraging when she struggled with difficult tasks. Nayeli began to understand that his decision to save her had been controversial, and she was determined to prove that his choice had been right. As the seasons changed and Nayeli's first year in the village progressed, she found herself thinking less and less about her old life. The settlement where she had grown up seemed like a memory from someone else's existence. Here, surrounded by people who valued her contributions and celebrated her strengths, she was becoming the person she was meant to be. Sitlali, meanwhile, was growing into a happy, healthy toddler who spoke Comanche as naturally as breathing. She played with the other village children and was loved by everyone who met her. Watching her daughter thrive in this environment, Nayeli knew she had found their true home. But she also knew that the outside world hadn't forgotten about them. Sometimes traders would come through the area with news from the settler communities. They spoke of increasing tensions between the army and various Indian tribes. They talked about new laws being passed and new policies being implemented. Nayeli worried about what these changes might mean for her adopted family. She had found peace and purpose in the village, but she wondered how long that peace could last. One evening, as she sat outside her lodge watching Sitlali play with the other children, Dakota came and sat beside her. "You think about old life," he observed in careful English. Nayeli shook her head. "I think about future," she replied in Comanche, proud that she could express herself in his language. Dakota smiled at her progress with the language. "Future is what we make," he said. "Not what others choose for us." Nayeli nodded, understanding that he was talking about more than just language or daily life. He was talking about the bigger picture, about the choices that individuals make when faced with fear and uncertainty. As the sun set over the village, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, Nayeli felt grateful for the path that had led her here. She had lost everything she thought mattered only to discover what really did matter. She had found her place in the world. The question now was whether the world would let her keep it. 2 years had passed since Nayeli and Sitlali first arrived in the village, and life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Nayeli had become skilled at many traditional crafts and was respected for her knowledge of medicinal plants. Sitlali, now almost 3 years old, ran around the village speaking fluent Comanche and calling everyone auntie or uncle in the traditional way. Nayeli's relationship with Dakota had grown slowly from friendship into something deeper. They spent long evenings talking by the fire, sharing stories about their different backgrounds and dreams for the future. The village had begun to expect that they would soon announce their intention to marry, which would make Nayeli's place in the community permanent and official. But on a hot summer morning, everything changed. Nayeli was teaching some of the village children how to identify healing plants when she heard horses approaching at a fast pace. This wasn't unusual. Hunting parties and traders came and went regularly, but something about the sound made her look up with concern. A scout came racing into the village, his horse covered in sweat from hard riding. He dismounted quickly and ran straight to the lodge where the village leaders were meeting. Nayeli couldn't hear what he was saying, but she could see the alarm on his face. Within minutes, the entire village was buzzing with urgent activity. Women began gathering children and moving them toward the center of the camp. Men checked their weapons and prepared their horses. Ayana came walking quickly toward Nayeli with worry written all over her face. "Soldiers coming?" she said in English. "Many soldiers. They ask about white woman and child." Nayeli felt her blood turn cold. She had always known this day might come, but she had hoped it never would. She gathered Sitlali into her arms and looked around at the village that had become her home. "How much time do we have?" she asked. "Maybe 1 hour," Ayana replied. "Maybe less." The village erupted into debate about what to do. Some people wanted to hide Nayeli and Sitlali until the soldiers left. Others thought they should try to move the entire village to a more remote location. A few suggested that they should prepare to fight if necessary. Dakota approached with his face set in grim determination. "We will not let them take you," he said firmly. But Nayeli shook her head. She had seen what happened when the army decided a village was being uncooperative. Innocent people died. Families were torn apart. Children lost their parents and parents lost their children. "I won't let this village be destroyed because of me," she told him. The argument that followed was heated and emotional. Dakota and many others insisted that Nayeli was family now, and family didn't abandon each other. They pointed out that she had proven her loyalty to the village many times over. She belonged here, and they would protect her. But Nayeli could see the fear in the eyes of the mothers holding their children. She could see the tension in the faces of the warriors who would have to fight against overwhelming odds. She knew that her presence put everyone she cared about in danger. As the dust cloud on the horizon grew larger, indicating the approaching soldiers, Nayeli made a decision that broke her heart, but felt necessary. "I'll go with them," she announced. The reaction was immediate and loud. Multiple people started arguing with her at once, telling her she was wrong and that there had to be another way. Sitlali, sensing the tension, began to cry and cling to her mother, but Ayana, the wise elder who had first welcomed them, raised her hand for silence. "This is Nayeli's choice," she said quietly. "We must respect her decision." The next hour was the longest of Nayeli's life. She packed the few belongings she wanted to keep, said goodbye to the women who had taught her so much, and tried to explain to Sitlali why they had to leave their home. Sitlali didn't understand. She kept pointing to her favorite places in the village and asking why no stay, in her mixed English and Comanche. Breaking the news to a 3-year-old that they had to leave the only home she could remember was almost impossible. When the soldiers finally arrived, they came in force. 30 mounted men with rifles and official documents. Their leader was a captain who looked tired and frustrated, like this was just another unpleasant job he had to complete. He rode into the village and called out in a loud voice, "We're looking for a white woman and child who were taken captive by this tribe. We're here to negotiate their release." Nayeli stepped forward before anyone else could speak. "I'm the woman you're looking for," she said clearly. "And this is my daughter." The captain looked surprised to see her walking forward. voluntarily, dressed in traditional Comanche clothing and speaking with confidence. He had probably expected to find a frightened captive begging for rescue. "Ma'am, I'm Captain Williams," he said, removing his hat respectfully. "We've been searching for you for quite some time. Your family back east hired us to find you and bring you home safely." Nayeli felt a stab of confusion. "My family? Your late husband's cousins," the captain explained. "They reported that you and your child were taken during a raid on their wagon train. They've been very worried about your welfare." Nayeli stared at him in disbelief. The same people who had abandoned her in the wilderness were now claiming to be concerned about her safety. They had told the authorities that she was kidnapped rather than admitting what they had really done. "Captain Williams," she said carefully, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. These people didn't capture me. They saved my life." The captain frowned. "Ma'am, I understand that sometimes captives develop feelings of loyalty toward their captors. It's a common reaction to trauma, but you're safe now. We're here to take you home." Around them, the village had gone completely silent. Everyone was watching this conversation with intense attention, understanding that the future of their community might depend on what happened next. Nayeli looked around at the faces of people who had become her true family. She saw Dakota standing tense and ready to fight for her. She saw Ayana watching with sad wisdom in her eyes. She saw the children she had taught, the women who had taught her, and the men who had accepted her as one of their own. Then she looked down at Sitlali, who was clinging to her dress and looking scared by all the strange men with guns. "This is my home," Nayeli said firmly. "These are my people. I choose to stay here." The captain's expression hardened. "Ma'am, I'm afraid that's not possible. We have orders to bring you back to civilization. You're not thinking clearly after your ordeal." "I'm thinking more clearly than I ever have in my life," Nayeli replied. What followed was a tense standoff that seemed to last forever. The soldiers had their orders, but they hadn't expected to deal with someone who refused to be rescued. The village warriors were ready to fight, but they knew they were outnumbered and outgunned. Finally, Dakota stepped forward and addressed the captain in careful English. "You see women who look happy, healthy, child who grows strong?" He gestured toward Nayeli and Sitlali. "We no take prisoner, we save family." The captain looked more closely at Nayeli and Sitlali. It was true that they both looked healthy and well cared for. Nayeli's skin was tanned from outdoor work but glowing with health. Sitlali, despite being scared by the soldiers, was clearly a thriving child. "Ma'am," the captain said slowly, "are you saying you want to stay here of your own free will?" "That's exactly what I'm saying," Nayeli confirmed. The captain looked around at the village, clearly struggling with a situation he hadn't been prepared for. His orders were to rescue a captive, but the supposed captive didn't want to be rescued. "Going to need some time to think about this," he said finally. "We'll make camp nearby tonight and discuss this further in the morning." As the soldiers moved away to set up their camp, the village remained on edge. Everyone knew that tomorrow would bring a decision that could change everything. That night, Nayeli lay awake holding Sitlali and wondering what the morning would bring. She had made her choice, but she wasn't sure the soldiers would respect it. And even if they did, she worried about what would happen to the village in the future. The collision between her two worlds had finally happened. Now she had to find a way to bridge them without destroying either one. The morning sun rose over a village that felt like it was holding its breath. Nayeli woke early and spent time in quiet prayer, asking for wisdom and strength for whatever was about to happen. Sitlali slept peacefully beside her, unaware that their entire future hung in the balance. Captain Williams arrived at the village just after sunrise, accompanied by two of his officers. His face was serious but not hostile, which gave Nayeli a small hope that he had spent the night thinking carefully about the situation. "Mrs. He paused, realizing he didn't know what to call her. "Nayeli," she said simply. "That's my name now." The captain nodded slowly. "Nayeli, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday. I've also been talking with my men about what we observed here." He looked around the village, taking in the sight of children playing safely, women working on daily tasks, and men preparing for a hunting trip. "This doesn't look like a place where prisoners are kept," he admitted, "and you certainly don't act like someone being held against your will." Nayeli felt a flutter of hope, but tried not to let it show on her face. Captain Williams continued, "However, I still have orders to bring you back, and I have concerns about your safety and your daughter's safety if tensions between settlers and tribes continue to increase." "Then let me show you something," Nayeli said. Over the next several hours, Nayeli took the captain and his officers on a tour of the village. She showed them the school where children learned practical skills alongside reading and mathematics. She demonstrated her knowledge of medicinal plants and explained how this knowledge was helping both the village and occasional visitors from other communities. Most importantly, she let them observe how Sitlali interacted with everyone around her. The little girl ran freely through the village, chattering in both Comanche and English, hugging adults and playing with other children. She was clearly happy, healthy, and loved. "Captain," Nayeli said as they watched Sitlali playing a traditional game with some village children, "what kind of life would she have if you took us away from here? Would she be accepted in a settler community, speaking Comanche and remembering this place as her home? Or would she always be seen as different, as strange?" The captain was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "You're asking me to make a decision that goes against my orders," he said. "I'm asking you to make a decision based on what you can see with your own eyes," Nayeli replied. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. A trading party arrived at the village. Settlers who had been doing business with this particular Comanche community for several years. They were surprised to see the soldiers but not alarmed, which told Captain Williams something important about the village's reputation in the area. The lead trader, an older man named Henderson, greeted Nayeli in Comanche and asked about her daughter. It was clear that he had met them before and considered them part of the village community. "Captain," Henderson said when introductions were made, "if you're here about Nayeli and little Sitlali, you should know that they're not prisoners. This village has helped us out of more than one difficult situation over the years. They're good people." Captain Williams spent the evening talking with Henderson about the relationships between this village and the surrounding settler communities. What he learned surprised him. Rather than being a source of conflict, this particular village had often served as a peaceful meeting ground where disputes could be resolved and trade could happen safely. That night, the captain asked to speak privately with Nayeli. "I'm going to make a decision that might get me in trouble with my superiors," he said, "but I believe it's the right decision." Nayeli waited, her heart pounding. "I'm going to report that we found you safe and well, living freely with a peaceful community," he continued. "I'm going to recommend that no further action be taken as long as you continue to be safe and happy." Nayeli felt tears of relief running down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "But," the captain added, "I want something in return." Nayeli looked at him questioningly. "I want you to serve as a liaison between this village and the territorial government. Your unique position, understanding both communities, could help prevent conflicts and misunderstandings." Nayeli thought about this request. It would mean taking on a responsibility that could sometimes put her in difficult positions, but it could also mean protecting both communities from unnecessary violence. "I agree," she said. Over the following months, Nayeli's new role as a cultural liaison proved more important than anyone had initially realized. When disputes arose over hunting territories, she helped negotiate fair compromises. When diseases spread through settler communities, she shared Comanche medicinal knowledge that saved lives. When misunderstandings threatened to escalate into violence, she served as a translator who could explain not just words but cultural meanings. Her relationship with Dakota also deepened during this time. He admired her courage in standing up to the soldiers and her wisdom in finding a way to protect both communities. When they finally married in a ceremony that blended Comanche traditions with some customs from her original culture, it felt like a symbol of the bridges being built between two worlds. Sitlali grew up truly bicultural, switching easily between English and Comanche, comfortable in both settler trading posts and traditional village settings. Her unique background made her a natural peacemaker, someone who could see conflicts from multiple perspectives and help others find common ground. As the years passed, Nayeli often thought about the morning when she woke up beside a dried creek bed, convinced that she and her baby were going to die alone in the wilderness. That moment of despair had led to a life she could never have imagined, a life of purpose, respect, and belonging. The village became known throughout the territory as a place where different communities could come together safely. Nayeli's story, spread too, told around campfires and dinner tables as an example of how understanding and respect could overcome fear and prejudice. When Sitlali was old enough to understand her full history, Nayeli told her about the people who had abandoned them and the warrior who had saved them. But she also taught her daughter that both kindness and cruelty could be found in every community, and that the most important thing was to choose kindness whenever possible. Years later, when Nayeli was an elderly woman with grandchildren playing around her feet, she would sometimes be asked if she ever regretted not returning to her original community when the soldiers came. The question always made her smile. "I did return to my community," she would answer. "I just had to travel farther than I expected to find it." Her story became a legend that was told in both Comanche and English, passed down through generations as a reminder that home isn't always where you start your journey. Sometimes it's where your journey leads you when you're brave enough to embrace the unexpected. Nayeli had been abandoned by people who should have protected her, but she had been saved by people who had no obligation to help her. In the end, she had learned that family isn't always about blood or shared history. Sometimes it's about shared values, mutual respect, and the decision to take care of each other regardless of differences. The little girl who had been left to die in the wilderness had grown into a woman who built bridges between worlds. And the baby who had been abandoned became a leader who used her unique heritage to promote understanding and peace. It wasn't the life either of them had been born to expect, but it was exactly the life they were meant to live.